Okay, so finished up La Révolution Française. Ended up being a win for the revolutionaries. In this case, the Girondins. Now you can look at the fame track here and see that the Gironde are dead last in fame. And you've got the Montagne way out in front, and the Sans-Culotte right behind, and kind of in the middle, the government, which at the end was the Thermidor, which is run by the Marais there in the green. And the Feuillants there were also right up there with the government. And then lagging way behind were the Royalists and the Gironde. But as you can see, when we pan over here to the victory points, you can see the Gironde came in dead last in victory points. Way out front were the Sans-Culotte and the Montagne. Feuillants and Marais tied, and the Royalists came in last. Well, how that works out, since the Royalists didn't have 25 points, which would give them an auto victory, then you look at the regime that you're in. We ended the game in the Thermidor, which is historically about where the regime was at the time this particular game ends, which is in 1795. The Directorate didn't come until after. So when the Thermidor is the regime, then you tally up your potential winners are the Gironde or the Marais, or I'm sorry, the Feuillants. And it comes down to whether the revolutionaries or the reactionaries came out on top. And in this case, you can see here, based on the points that each side ended up with, the Feuillants with 17 tilted things to the revolutionary side, same for the Marais. The Gironde, way down there at 8, tilted things to the reactionary side, as did the Montagne with only 22, also tilted towards the reactionary, whereas the Sans-Culotte had enough points to keep things on the revolutionary side of the scale. So you end up with a 3-2 result for the revolutionaries, which means in the Thermidor regime, that means the Gironde win. Had it been reactionary, I believe it would have been the Feuillants. Either the Feuillants or the Marais. I actually don't remember now. But it would have been one of those two and not the Gironde. So you get this weird situation where the two most revolutionary factions, the Montagne and the Sans-Culotte, dominated in points and in fame at the end of the day. And in fact also had, if you look at the map here, you can see all of the regions controlled by the Sans-Culotte there, which are the dark red counters. And there's a couple out there. The mountain didn't have as many, but they did have a couple of regions, 4 I think under their control there at the end. But the Sans-Culotte had quite a few. Certainly more than the Gironde, which only had 1, and the Feuillants, which I think had 2 or 3, and the Marais, which didn't have any. And then the Royalists, I think they had 4 factions by the end of the game, but still not enough to get them anywhere near what they needed to secure a victory. So you get this. I mean, anybody looking at this thinking, well, if you want control of regions and fame, then how on earth could the Sans-Culotte or the Mountain both end up as the losers? Well, that's a good question. And I guess it just comes down to the regimes. It's not just about getting the control of regions. It's also about getting the right regime in place at the right time. Had the game ended in the Terror, then you probably would have had the Montagne or the Sans Culottes being your winners. But as it ended in the Thermidor, which happens, it changed. The regime was in the Terror for, I think, turns 4, 5, and 6, and then the last 2 turns it had moved to the Thermidor. It moves from the Terror to the Thermidor when 2 laws fail to get passed. And when you pass laws during the Terror, you do it by rolling the dice and using the resolution chart. And as it turns out, the Mountain, for a couple of laws they wanted to pass, got terrible rolls. So they ended up having 2 laws actually in the same turn get rejected. So the Marais can immediately at that point install the Thermidor. And when that happened, at the time, Robespierre and Saint-Just, which are 2 fairly famous Montagnard representatives, were in Paris at the time. Anybody who becomes outlawed, which the Montagnard did once the Thermidor was installed, anybody who's outlawed that's in Paris immediately goes to jail. So those guys ended up in jail, and within that turn, to the guillotine, lost their heads. Then later on also, Chaumette of the Sans Culottes ended up in the guillotine, as did Cadoudal, a royalist. The irony is that during the Terror, nobody had their heads chopped off. It was only after the Terror ended that all these guys got sent to the guillotine. So, kind of ended up historical in that sense. A little ahistorical in the sense that the Terror was not very terrible, at least in terms of guillotine-related violence. But I guess we can maybe just assume that lots of people, other than famous personages, were sent to the guillotine. During the Terror, the Montagnard actually ended up outlawing a couple of personalities. I'm not sure where they are. There's Danton. I think he was one of the merciful. Whoops, sorry. He was one of the merciful in the game. And I forget who the other guy is. Demoulin, maybe. He ended up being outlawed due to a random event that encouraged the Montagnard to outlaw those 2 personalities and try and arrest them and or remove their heads. Unfortunately, the arrests really kind of slow down, and this is one of the things that happens. You can see here the economy is in the zone level 2 there, which means that prices and everything are doubled. When we're talking about arrests, since the government does arrests in the game, if that inflation starts to get high, and you've got lots of armies running around, which in this case the government did, they were at war through the end of the game. They were never able to eliminate the Sardinian army here, which is pretty terrible. The Sardinians ended up being the one foreign army that remained on the map. If you end up with lots of zones under control by coalition powers, that eats into the government's budget. But then when you have you're recruiting or conscripting revolutionary armies each turn, which they had passed the conscription law to do that, you end up running into a army maintenance issue that can just suck up the government's entire budget, which I was tracking up here in the little republic symbol. Which means the government has to make some tough choices about with the paltry sum they have left over from what they have to set aside each turn for army maintenance. to do optional things like arresting personalities or suppressing revolts or enacting laws or things like that. If money gets skimpy, the faction in control of the government does not want to end up bankrupting the government, because that'll just kill their fame and cause problems for them in terms of fame level. And when you get down there where the Gironde is, on that low fame track, just trying to do anything. I mean, trying to plot in regions, trying to kick people out of regions, trying to propose laws. Anything becomes vastly more difficult to achieve. And it turns into a vicious cycle, really, because as your fame gets higher, you'll be more successful at accomplishing objectives, which in turn increases your fame. Down here, as your fame gets lower, it becomes harder to do things, and therefore you end up failing objectives, and that hurts your fame. So it turns into this cycle where the lower your fame is, the harder it is to get back out of that low zone, the harder it is to get it higher. So you really don't want to end up in a hole like the Gironde ended up in, with some terrible rolls and some random events. And at the beginning of the game, the Royalists can pay money to hit the Girondins' fame. They just got into a hole that they couldn't get out of. And of course, the irony being that they ultimately ended up winning the game. Excuse me. So you end up with this sort of topsy-turvy kind of thing where you think, oh, the Sans-Culottes or the Montagne are doing all the right things to win the game. And it ends up being the guy who was basically crippled towards the end of the game, fame-wise, and kept failing and failing and failing anything he was trying to do. Plot regions, suppress revolts, anything. So I think it's kind of cool that it works that way. It certainly makes it very interesting at the end, and it makes the victory mean something. So you're not going into that last turn thinking, well, these guys have been running away with it for 3 turns, and we're basically just playing it out as a formality. It really eliminates that and leaves a lot of surprise and potential for these sort of reversals at the end of the game, where it really does come down to the last turn and adding up those points. You can kind of get a sense of what people's victory points are going to be by how many regions are out there, how many deputies they have in the National Assembly, what the particular regime is, what are you going to be looking for. Now, I played with the quote-unquote historical rules, which only allow for 4 regimes, which is the legislative, the convention, the terror, and the thermidor, which is where things went historically. If you play with the open rules, there's another 4 regimes, I think, at least. Beyond those, I think over here on our chart, I think you've got the First Republic, Second Terror, Directorate, and then I guess the Royalist coup it's not really a regime. That's just if they get 25 points, they'll win at the end of the game. So you've got these 3 other, basically the Second Terror is basically the Wrath, Directorate, and First Republic. The only reason I didn't play with those is because just on my first time through, it was already dizzying enough trying to keep all the different things involved, all the different rules involved for each regime, all the different ways each regime changed things, like the makeup of the National Assembly, how they deal with people in prison and the guillotine, how they vote for laws. All these things are different with each regime, and so I just didn't want to face the challenge of trying to do those other 3 regimes and trying to keep that straight, what I would need to do just for this first playthrough. So I'm sure you include those regimes, you could have a lot more regime change in the game. Really, the game was in the legislative, I think, up until turn 4. I think on turn 4, then the terror was installed. And that was around for the end of turn 4, turns 5 and 6, and then for 7 and 8, on turn 6, the Thermidor was installed. And so for the last 2 turns, you ended up with the Thermidor. So we didn't even have the convention in the game, so we only went through 3 of the 4 regimes. And maybe that worked out better for the Girondins. The Girondins, their ideal regime is the convention. But it may have worked out better for them that the game ended with the Thermidor, and that the Sans-Culotte and the Mountain did as well as they did, because that ended up pushing it over to the revolutionary side, which favored the Girondins. So, and one of the things here you can see, these assignats here, these paper ones, which the game came with these, but you can see it also has counters for the assignats. I ended up using the counters in the game as opposed to the money. I just thought it was weird that they covered both, because there's plenty of these counters, but they also included this stack of paper money in the game, which you can see is looks like just photocopied graphics onto little slips of colored paper by denomination. I guess the paper money would be maybe easier to use if you were playing an actual face-to-face 6-player game. It would be easier for people to pass the money around and stuff when they're spending, and for a person who's the banker to hand it out to the different individuals. So kind of a neat touch. I don't know if I'll ever use it. If I can, I've got a good group, my Empires in Arms group, that gets together and does other multiplayer type games. I think if they can handle Empires in Arms, they could certainly handle this. This would definitely go a lot faster. We could probably play this in a day, or at least do a couple of evening sessions and get through a game of this. I think probably one more solo playthrough for me, and I'd be ready to try and teach this to a group. There's definite balance issues. I think if you're playing this opposed, there'd be some people wondering, what am I supposed to do? I don't have anything to do. My faction's out of cash. As the Royalist, you're kind of sitting there. Everybody hates you. There's nobody you can really ally with except the Frion, and even the Frion are going to be suspicious of your motives, because they don't want you to get too powerful, or else you'll get the solo victory and everybody else loses. So, there's these factions like the Royalists that are just, how do you balance that when they are the everybody loses if they win faction? Whereas you can see here the game actually breaks down that the 2nd through 6th place finishers. So you can see the Gironde were the winner, and when the Gironde are the winner under the Thermidor, then that means the Marais come in 2nd, the Montagne come in 3rd, the Sans-Culotte come in 4th, and the Frion come in 5th, and the Royalists come in last. That's all assigned, so you can play for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever place. So I guess people could shoot for that, but as the Royalist, it's going to be if you win, everyone else finishes last. There is no 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or whatever if the Royalist wins. So I could see that preventing some people from wanting to play as that last faction. Overall, I had a good time, enjoyed it, and we'll probably play again with all the different factions, just to get a sense of, or all the different regimes, just to get a sense of the added layers that can add to it, because that'll create some different kind of jockeying, some different sort of perceptions among the different factions of what they can do to win. So I think that would make for actually a very different game. But I learned the basics here so far, and again, thanks to the errata and things like that, I was able to correct a lot of the errors I made, and I made plenty. Lots of stuff that I forgot, but things that were in the rules that were not in the most intuitive place in the rules that you would tend to forget over and over. One of the things, as an example, is when the clergy or the coalition track are at certain levels, the Royalist faction gets fame bonuses each turn or each time it reaches certain levels. Well, that's listed at the very beginning of the rules in the track descriptions. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the rules that I can see. It's not under faction-specific information. It's not in a sequence of play where the fame calculation sequence of play where you'd think they'd just list all the things that that people could do per turn. Reminder, here's all the things that can affect fame in a turn. No, it's the description of the actual tracks themselves and how they work. It says, oh, by the way, if clergy's a level 2, the royalist gets a +1 fame. Or if the commune is at level 3, the sans-culotte gets a +2 fame. Or stuff that you would think, well, that should be in some area of the rules dealing with calculation, or it should be multiple different places in the rules. But no, it's actually only in the track descriptions in the rules. So things like that in the rules can be very were one of the things that made the rules challenging. But again, not unplayable. I know I've read online different comments, different reviews people had about the rules, was just that they're just impossible to get through. It's just impossible to deal with. And I didn't really feel that way. They were challenging, but I've actually faced more technically challenging rules. These were more, not technically challenging, but I don't know. I can't really think of the word, but they were more mentally challenging, just in terms of organization and things like that. So, but not unplayable. I definitely played, enjoyed, and look forward to enjoying again. Thanks.